Okay, good evening, everybody. Crikey. Good evening, everybody. By the clock in the council chamber, it's showing 6 o'clock, so we're going to make a start. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Scrutiny and Policy Overview Committee. In order to assist in the process this evening, ask everyone to ensure that mobile phones are either switched off or on silent mode. We would be grateful if you would remain quiet while the meeting is in progress, and I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be filmed by the Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. However, I've never seen any of these things viewed. I can never seem to get it to work. If you're seated in the chamber, it is possible that the cameras will capture your image, and by your presence you are deemed to consent to be filmed, and the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. As the chairman of the meeting, I can at my discretion terminate or suspend filming if, in my opinion, continuing to do so would prejudice the proceedings of the meeting, or if I consider that continued filming might infringe the rights of any individual or breach any statutory provision. Finally, there are no planned fire drills this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately via the emergency exit, which is over there in the corner. Many thanks. I'd like to start off by welcoming Councillor Claire Bath. Thank you for coming and joining us. And also Daniel, who is clerking us for this evening. We've worked together fairly closely on planning in the past, so it's a renewal of old relationships, I think. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman, I have no apologies tonight.
Declarations of interests.
Sorry, I just have apologies for Councillor Tavis Fox, and also to say that unfortunately, because I only knew I was on this committee last Tuesday, I have a prior engagement tonight, so I will have to leave at 6:30 tonight, so okay. Apologies for that.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Minutes of the previous meeting, I'm assuming that we've all had a look at those. Are we content?
I propose, Chairman.
And seconded by Councillor Neil. Are we all content? Thank you. Agenda item 4, brought this to the beginning of the meeting, is the update on planning pre-application charging. Jane.
Thank you. I'll start with just a quick bit of background. At the meeting on the 25th of October last year, Resources Committee approved an updated schedule of fees for a planning pre-application service and also a change to the delivery of the planning advice to the general public, such that customer service will now provide advice on straightforward factual matters and signpost on to sources of information on more complex matters. The result of this would be that there was no longer to be a planning officer on duty. The matter had previously been considered by Scrutiny and Policy at the meeting on the 12th of September, and it was agreed we'd bring a report back to you after the new service had been operational for 3 months. Now, we had envisaged that the new pre-application service would go live in January 2018, but there were some technical issues that meant that we didn't start this until late March. So we've now been operational for some 5 months. In preparation for implementation of the new processes, we arranged training sessions both for planning officers and also our customer service staff. And we've provided a set of information to help them with their guidance. We also carried out, as had been agreed, that planning officers would continue to be available for customers calling into the office for the first month. So effectively we ran the old and new system in parallel, while the customer services built their confidence in responding to the public queries. The planning duty officer service ceased on the 1st of May, although planning officers remain on hand to assist when required. That is very, very rarely now, probably once a week or so. It's not yet possible to assess how successful the service has been in meeting the objectives that were stated in the original paper, as we haven't had many proposals for which advice has been given come forward as applications as yet. and even fewer have been determined. I have got the figures on that if anybody is interested. It's envisaged that we will be able to provide more details on whether or not advice is being followed, and if so, what impact this is having on the percentage of applications that are received as valid, and also to enable us to make more speedy decisions, and in fact whether or not we are able to give more positive decisions. We hope this will be possible when the service has been operational for about a year. One of the objectives was looking at cost recovery of delivering the service, and I can update that from when the report was written, there has now been an income of just under £5,000, excluding VAT. You'll note at paragraph 3.4 of your report, the customer services team leader has provided feedback and has said that since the planning duty officer service ended, they have received no complaints. And I have had an update from her today to say that that still remains the case. The customer services team are using detailed notes which have been provided for them. They're also using the planning portal and Dorset View to help out with queries that are received via face-to-face, telephone and email contact. They are currently receiving around 25 to 30 queries a day. The team have vastly increased their knowledge and confidence in dealing with planning queries, and if any doubt, they are able to successfully call on planning to assist them with the query. The team leader also notes that it's early days, but she does feel that due to the training and communications put in place before the go-live date, planning queries are successfully being dealt with at the first point of contact, and the customers are receiving the correct advice in a timely manner. With regard to the quality of the service from planning officers, for those seeking formal pre-application advice, at this moment in time, the only indicator that we can fall back on to let you know how successful it's being is whether or not we've received any complaints or requests for refund of the fees that have been paid, and in both cases the answer to that is no. From a management point of view, the formalisation of the service is assisting us in programming work and monitoring it as well, and that's helping us towards the delivery of an efficient development management service. There's been no detrimental impact in terms of performance, speed, quality of decision making, which actually has continued to improve over the last 2 quarters. In summary, the revised service is operating effectively from the planning and customer services point of view and has not been the cause of any complaints from customers. And as I mentioned before, planning officers continue to be available to assist customer services should the need arise. Thank you.
Thank you for that very thorough overview. We're going into a question phase. I don't know if anybody's got any questions, but while you're thinking of them, I'm going to start, if I may. So, do we do a survey of users, rather like when you phone up Apple or all these people, they say, would you like to take part in a very short survey? Do we do that?
We haven't done, no.
Okay, but it's not something that we couldn't do.
I see no reason why we couldn't do it, no.
Okay, thank you. Just to remind, thank you, Claire, just bear with me a sec. Just to remind members that the whole purpose of pre-app charging is not to make a profit out of planning, but to recover the significant costs that we invest in it, because if we don't recover the cost, then people who are using the planning service are getting something which isn't there for the members of the community who are paying for it, if that makes sense. I've got Councillor Mrs. Bath.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to ask what the delay is when people apply for pre-application advice before actually receiving it and having their meeting with the planning officer.
We have set time scales, and as we are generally meeting those. Where we are not, it's generally through agreement with the person who's applied. Take, for example, a meeting. We obviously have to arrange the meeting, and sometimes that can be delayed either through officer availability or the people actually being able to get whoever they want to attend that meeting. So that can cause some delays, but that is all done in agreement. So we are able to monitor the time that is being taken.
So what is the timescale that you work towards for actually when somebody applies for pre-application advice?
You've asked me the one question I wasn't prepared for. It is set
okay.
out in our notes on the website. I think for letters it's something in the order of about 15 days turnaround, and for meetings it's a letter coming out within a set number of days after the meeting has taken place, a meeting and or site visit.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Following up from that, if I may just check one or 2 points. We said that, as I understand it, the pattern should be that somebody rings up and says, or comes in or says, I'm thinking, for the sake of argument, of putting in a loft extension or building an extension, or I want to build a garage or something like that. At that point, it is an informal inquiry, and so they're then saying, can I come in and talk to you? Can I have a meeting? Can we? Okay. On the result of that advice, they may or may not put in an application. Am I right?
If somebody phoned up with an informal inquiry as to whether they wanted to do a loft extension, they would be directed towards the pre-application service. So to come in through that, and we require them to submit a certain amount of information, so we have sufficient detail to give them some usable information back, so something that they can actually rely on. So we require them to put that in writing to us and to pay a fee.
Okay. So we've got now, through you, Chairman, a process whereby somebody makes contact with you and says, thinking about a loft extension or whatever. We say to them, well, we need this amount of information. We will also need, you will need to pay a fee. Okay? So they pay the fee. As a result of that, they get the meeting. They pay the fee before they get the meeting. Okay. Can you give us some idea how much the fee is, please?
I can. Well, it depends on the scale of the development, but for a loft extension, which would be a householder, it would be £100 for a 30-minute meeting, or a £75 fee if they chose just to do it by exchange of letters.
Right, so they, again through you, Chairman, they don't actually have to come in and they can do it through exchange of letters. Okay. Do we know, is there any record of how many proceed from the actual seeking advice stage to making an application?
I can tell you at the moment that we have had 53 applications come in. We've had 53 applications, and 14 of those so far have converted to planning applications, of which 6 have been granted already and 8 still remain under consideration.
So there have been 53, what you might say is an inquiry, which has led to 14 applications. And that then goes into the normal process. So that's quite interesting. Do we have any idea as to why there is such a relatively low 1 in 5 roughly proceeds to application?
No, we don't, but I mean, the service has been running for a relatively short period of time. I think for a lot of people it starts as a concept and then they have to develop it up, but depending on the advice that they're given, because don't forget, of those 53 inquiries, and I'm afraid our system doesn't enable me to pull off how many of those have been positive and how many of those have been a little negative. So I can't give you that, but some of them will have been, no, we don't think you will get permission for what you are looking for, and that is part of the process. If you go back to what we originally put in front of members, we did point out that at this stage it costs very little to get some information about the likelihood of getting permission, so you can save yourself all that money in having plans properly drawn up. So some of those will have been negative. Some may be being prepared at the moment to be submitted. Some people may simply have changed their minds.
Okay. Any more?
Yeah, and the other point we did say about the quality of decision making. Could you elaborate a little on that, please?
The quality of decision making is one of the new government measures, which is how many applications that we refuse that go to appeal are actually allowed at appeal. So that is a measure that the government uses for the quality of decision making.
The next question, I'm sure you're going to guess what it's going to be. Do we have any percentage figures for the, because there must be a differentiation here, those that are refused by the officers or refused by committee in line with officer recommendation, and those that are refused by the committee against officer recommendation. And when I was chairman once before, we were running at something like 89% of decisions made in line with officer recommendation were upheld by the inspectorate, and something like 70% by the committee were, the difference was 90%, 90%, 89%, whatever, upheld in line, and 70% where the committee had gone against the officer's recommendation, and yet the decision was upheld. Do we have any comparable up-to-date figures?
We could get you some figures, but I don't have them today.
That would be very interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. I have a similar question, and if I come along to the council, and say, right, I want to do a loft extension, or I want to build a conservatory, and I take all the pre-app advice, if I take that pre-app advice and then the application is turned down, I would feel a little bit miffed, because I've paid for the advice from a professional officer and then the application's turned down. What is that? How do you see that working?
We caveat all advice that we give that it is advice given on the basis of the information provided to us. We don't always do a site visit, and we're very clear about that. So if, for example, somebody says there is no tree that is going to be affected by a development, and they haven't provided us with sufficient information to see for ourselves that there's a tree, we would go back to them and we would say, subject to there being no trees affected, they may still come in with an application. You'd be surprised at how many people don't actually follow the advice that they are given, and it's particularly when it was given verbally, would pick up on the positives and not the negatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I just ask about the numbers of people coming to the customer services team, either by visit or email, etc.? You say 25 to 30 a day, which surely equates to about 140 in a month. No, in a week. That doesn't seem to tie up with the numbers who are putting applications in. But what I wanted to ask was, do we have any means of tracking those who are given advice by the customer services team and those who use the computer to put in their applications? Because we're obviously receiving a lot of inquiries, but we don't seem to have a lot of applications following on.
Those figures will reflect both East Dorset and Christchurch, and there will be more in East Dorset. I don't have a breakdown of those figures. I don't know if customer services could give me a breakdown of those figures. a number of planning queries that come in will be to look at where they've been advised that there's an application in their neighbourhood, their next door neighbour. So a lot of the queries will be to do with other applications, not people looking to submit their own applications. So I can't give you a breakdown on those figures. I don't know how many of those are recorded by customer services, but we can ask and try and get you that information if that would be helpful.
Could I further ask? It says that we tell them how to find further information on the internet. What happens to those who don't have internet abilities, technical abilities? Because there must be an awful lot. Have you got an officer who does?
The customer services team will help people who come into the office. There are terminals in both of the customer services offices, and they will help them to look at the information that they need. They also have a set of frequently asked questions which they will share that information with the responses to those with other people.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to ask, now that permission in principle has come into play, is that likely to take away the need for this to some extent? Because presumably if people go down that avenue, they can put in an application, a PIP, and not need this pre-application advice.
We have not had any permission in principle applications at the moment, and as you may recall, we're not absolutely certain we could accept them if we had them. We're still waiting for some advice to come back on from council. But would they choose to go down the pre-app route? I think some of them might still choose to do that as an initial point, but I don't know.
Could I ask, just for the benefit of those members of the committee that don't know what permission in principle means, that you could just sort of elucidate, please?
Permission in principle is a new form of application type that was introduced earlier this year. It's for minor developments only. It has to be for housing-led development, so that means 10 or less units. There can be an element of commercial in there as well. And we have 35 days in which to assess and determine these applications. So there's a shorter neighbour notification period. We only put up a site notice, we don't write to people. So there's a very compressed period of time in which to determine the applications. We can only look at location, use and amount as part of that application. So all the information that you'd be used to seeing with schemes of maybe 10 houses, the traffic surveys, the layout, or the tree information, the ecology, will not form part of these applications. They are very, very basic to do what they say, which is to give you an in principle. So they are lighter touch than an outline planning application.
Thank you. I'm not going to pursue it because it's not part of the current brief, but it's quite interesting, and I'm sure it will raise a number of questions when it comes back to us again. Vice Chairman. Well, before you come in, is there anybody else with any questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Neil, I beg your pardon.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I've got two, if that's okay. You mentioned 53 applicants and 14 converted. Excuse me tonight. Excuse me. Coughing, yeah. You say there's 14 converted, 8 are outstanding, so that really means 6 have actually had a decision. Were those decisions all in favour or were they refusals amongst those?
All 6 of those have been granted.
That's fine. You also, in your earlier questioning, you referred to the 15 days on the pre-app where you would normally, it says so on the website. You didn't actually give an answer on that. Can we tell whether we're meeting the target of that 15 days?
We will be able, I could provide you with that information. Again, I don't have that information with me tonight, but we can provide that.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to come back on the information regarding the submission and when the outcome is not favourable, I think what might cause some concern to an applicant is if they come to you and they give you all the information that you require and it's all accurate, absolutely by the book, and you say, yes, this looks wonderful. Now I know you put the caveat in and say this has to be subject to the final application and so on, but your pre-application advice is that whatever it is that you have put in is going to be, that there is no objection, nihil obstat, whatever you call it. In other words, it's straight down the line, you can't see any problem with it. A councillor calls it in, we exercise our prerogative and we say we don't like it on these planning grounds and it's refused. In those circumstances, might not the applicant feel a little aggrieved?
We would always make people aware that that is one of the options for a planning committee to do. However, if the planning committee had sound planning grounds for refusing an application, I would hope that those were grounds that had been pointed out that there was an area of risk around them. So to say that we would say you're going to get planning permission, we would never say anything as categoric as that. We would say that it looks okay, it looks all right to us in terms of its design, its scale, its siting, limited impact on neighbouring. But again, we do not do at that stage, we do not do consultations with the Highways Authority or with Natural England or with any of our other consultees, because they all run their own pre-app service. So if we felt there was a need for that, we would advise people to go to those. So it's never going to be as comprehensive as coming in with an application.
Thank you, Chairman. One last point and then I will shut up, I promise. You mentioned there, I think, the one ground that could be a problem when you said that the effect on the neighbours. Now, this has to be, to a large extent, subjective, and the officers may feel that the effect on the neighbours is minor. And in the 18 years I've sat on planning, there have been quite a few occasions when the officers have said the effect on the neighbours is minimal, and we've looked at it and we've said, no, we think this is quite a detrimental effect, and we've refused it. So that is not something that you could forecast, I don't suppose. And I think that's, and I'm reassured to know that you do say that in the end, obviously you can't commit the committee, you can't even commit the officers, because something may come to light later on. And provided you point that out, I think we are safeguarded, but it just is an area of concern, that because we have had this happen, I think before your time, when somebody has got very, very stroppy indeed.
Just to reassure you, we do not predetermine an application that may come in. We are looking to influence sometimes the design, how that design might end up. We don't know till it comes in. So we are very careful to caveat everything that we say, not simply to sort of take away all responsibility in terms of our replies, but so that people are aware that the planning service, the planning system, allows for judgments to be made, and what you weigh as acceptable, I may not, and vice versa. And that is just it's an inherent part of the planning system.
Thank you for that. I'm assuming then we're all done. Are you content that we note the updates? Are we content? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Jane, thank you very much for your time. What have I done? Sorry?
Could I ask Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate for us to congratulate the customer services team on meeting the demands of this new service, because they seem to have done it with enthusiasm and dedication?
I think that's a very good suggestion. Happy to take that forward.
I do have to leave now.
All right,
Mr.
Claire.
Chairman.
Thank you. Also, in that, to perhaps pursue the possibility of doing a sample survey of users. So I should have mentioned that before you stepped down.
I have taken away a few questions which I will provide back to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 5, which is ground maintenance standards review. Mr. Reeks, good evening, sir.
Good evening. I'm here to discuss with you the grounds maintenance standards review, as you'll see from the report before you. In effect, the sort of most recent sea change in grounds maintenance delivery came about in 2014, when it was agreed by the Community Services Committee that the grounds maintenance service would be retained as an in-house operation. Under standard of 7 cuts per year as a minimum was agreed at that committee. As you'll note from the report, which is relatively short, the overall sort of level of our service is vast, grass cutting being just one element of it. The grass cutting element of it, just to give you an idea of scale, is somewhere around 1 million square metres of grass within the borough area. As such, it was felt possibly the best way to sort of give you a tour de force of what we do was via the marvellous stat map. For members which may not be aware, this is a corporate GIS mapping programme that we use pretty much across the council services, with a variety of different layers on it, a variety of different functions. And in our world, it is our sort of Bible, so to speak, of what goes on. In effect, and do feel free to chip in and ask me to move things around, what you're seeing in front of you at the moment, in effect, is pretty much the total area of grass cutting. So that's primarily split between grass which is owned by Christchurch Borough Council, grass which is owned by DCC, which we cut under a agency agreement with DCC, and also a variety of other sort of bits and bobs, so to speak, that are leased or licensed into us, which we cut. That you're seeing on the screen, in effect, is cut as a minimum 7 times a year. Just as a bit of an aside, we need to be slightly careful about our sort of standard guidelines, obviously, because we are an in-house operation. There's no additional costing there per cut. So what we tend to work on is a sort of hybrid of performance against number of cuts. So for example, if the grass hasn't grown due to drought, as we found earlier on in the year, or the ground conditions are such that we just cannot get those machines on the grass, we won't cut them. But because it's an in-house service, that labour capacity is then deployed in one of the many other areas of service that we look after, shrub cutting, cemetery work, etc., etc. So we use our sort of cutting numbers as a guide. Equally, across the amenity areas, we've been known to do up to 9. So, as in the case of this year, we had a very dry summer, a reasonably wet late summer, we'll probably be cutting up into December as required. Within that area, and you have to bear with me because I'm going to try and do two things at once. Within those sort of basic areas, if you like, of the 7 cuts a year that I talk about, we also have some additional categories which are based on the sort of historical notions, if you like, and also just the way in which they're cut. We have different machinery for different types of sites. So that primarily works out to what we call prestige areas. So what you're now looking at, that in effect is, and we can zoom into this as members require, that is a selection of areas which we consider to be sort of more high profile, more prestige, as the name suggests. So a lot around the town centre, entrance points to the town, etc. Some of those are cut more frequently with a different type of machine. So they're cut with a cylinder mower, cylinder triple, as opposed to the normal rotaries. Or they might be rotary areas that are what we call double cut. So instead of the guys spinning over them once, they'll spin over them twice, which just beats that sort of arising the sward down a little bit lower. Those are cut somewhere between 12 and 18 times a year, depending on growth, capacity, etc., etc. We also have what we refer to as the gang mowing round. So this, if you like, as the name suggests, these are bigger areas. They're cut with a much bigger machine, a tractor towed machine. That again gives a higher quality of cut due to the nature of much of the areas and the way they're done. They are frequently cut more regularly, again somewhere between 12 and 18 times a year, as sort of demand and weather conditions allow. I think the important thing to bear in mind, members, that in our sort of moment in 2014, if you like, the service, it was agreed with Stonehouse against a fixed budget. That budget hasn't increased, it's actually decreased due to a variety of reasons. And we are at capacity. You know, we do not have any spare capacity as things stand. So whilst we are always willing to work with partners, communities, members, etc., to ensure that within our capacity we're delivering the best service possible, it needs to be understood that, you know, an improvement in standards somewhere has to be mirrored by a decrease in standard or a decrease in capacity elsewhere, as things stand with the current budget at the moment. Very happy to take questions and zoom into particular areas as required. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hilliard, you can kick off.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few questions, if you
Please
don't mind.
ask your questions and then we'll ask somebody else.
Okay. So first of
Just
all,
before you start, I think Mr. Reeks was saying that if you want to zone in on your area, he's quite happy and has the technology that will allow you to do that. So you can give particular examples, should you wish.
so I'm pretty happy with the Muddyford and Friescliff area. It's no issues there. The questions, first of all, you cover pathways, because I was trying to see like the Summerford near Sainsbury's going along the dual carriageway, that cutting, because I know a couple of residents, when it was overgrown, we asked you, and then within a few days your team cut it. Is that the general way it works out of your sync system?
Yeah, so what we will try to do is everything is governed as best as it can be by a series of round lists and schedules and timetables. And we always sort of say to people, you know, we can't get all the grass and all the hedges to look the same at the same time. There will always be long areas and short areas, and they sort of swap around and go on. What we try and do, and this again was one of the major points around the in-house service, is we will try and react if possible. So whilst, you know, that the hedge that you talk about, it might have been due to be cut in September. if we get a call in July and we consider it, you know, a serious issue and we've got a little bit of spare capacity, we'll try and just pop out at some point and get that work done.
Around, does your team cover the flowers on the roundabouts, or is that Dorset?
Yes, that's another element of the grounds maintenance service delivery.
Right, okay. Because I was at a meeting of Highcliffe residents last night, and it was a signpost roundabout as you come in near Chewton Glen. They were saying that previous years it was well flowered. Now there isn't much there, and they thought that there was no resource, no budget to do that roundabout. Everything else was in the town centre. So it'd be useful just to understand how money's tight, we know, but how they're apportioned, if all roundabouts do get a say or not. Thanks.
So to some extent, believe it or not, it's governed by growing conditions. Soil types are quite important for a lot of the annual work. Depending on that soil type and partly the acidity of the thing, but also the sort of geology, if you like, the very minute geology of it. Often you find a lot of highway spoils left over on verges from where roadwork's taken. That's sometimes taken into account. Also, there's a piece of work going on looking at the sustainability of the stuff. So rather than repeatedly twice a year planting with annuals, we're looking at much more the longevity of things. So a selection of kind of grasses and perennials, which, you know, if it's done correctly, once established, can give just as good a show. It's quite a common theme around local authorities going forward. So no, there is no sort of hidden agenda to, you know, allocate resource to favourite roundabouts. That really is it.
And just the last question. It's probably not in your area because it weeds on alongside pavements, but do you engage with Dorset? So if you're cutting the side of a road, the hedge or the verge, do you feed back to Dorset, say there's a lot of weeds, they're even higher than the actual verge? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to feedback every time we saw that, we'd be on the phone pretty much non-stop. But yes, there is a sort of regular, if not continual, dialogue between the supervisors in our teams and supervisors in the DCC teams. As members may be aware, DCC made a decision to cut the weed spraying down to once a year. That causes a variety of problems, as you obviously seen. So yes, we do. It frustrates us chronically because no matter how good a job we make of our grass, it's always sort of let down somewhat by the verge weeds. But yes, we do.
I know we've got a few areas with wildflower seeds, but would it be a good idea to use them more, especially on some of the sort of uncultivated wild areas, because it will keep the weeds down? Or have you got the same problem there with the wrong kind of soil, etc.? It would be a cheap way to achieve it without too much maintenance.
Okay, there's quite an interesting sort of conception around the wildflower seeds, because they're not in any way, shape or form wild, and they're certainly not native. So most of those are high performing cultivars, often from southern European countries. So the seeding operation is reasonably costly. What's more costly and time consuming is the ground preparations that go before them. So you might quite often notice that in the early spring, the areas that we seed are weed sprayed, so it all goes yellow. Then they're rotivated to create a fine tilth on bare soil, and then they're seeded. We've been working with various industry partners looking for sort of longer lasting perennials, so we only have to do the job once. But what you tend to find is, in real terms, certainly sort of southern England proper native wildflowers are really quite boring, and really quite fussy about where they grow. So in order to get that wow factor, we have to use the imported cultivars. So that's not to say we couldn't increase the scale of wildflower planting. it just needs to sort of be acknowledged that there is quite a significant cost to that. And in terms of kind of the ease of management, it actually makes things more complicated. I know it shouldn't, but it does.
Chairman, could I congratulate you on this wildflower section, because it does seem to have attracted a lot of attention and compliments and really provides a lot of interest and colour, and I think you're to be congratulated. I noticed that I think it's the Stony Lane roundabout on the bypass seemed to suffer from moles at one stage of the year. Does that come to you for ground maintenance, or do you have to go to an outside body?
Yes, we don't have any in-house treatment, any qualified staff in-house. We don't tend to treat them, if I'm completely honest. It's massively risky in a public area. The chemical control used is nasty stuff, it's cyanide basically. So the area has to be securely fenced off for a period of at least 48 hours after the treatment has taken place. The more traditional methods cause a reasonable amount of upset with mole traps, and again there's a public safety angle. So what we tend to look at is a more sort of organic, sensitive method of removing the molehills before we cut, which then doesn't create those kind of bare patches. So we do our best, but chemical treatment isn't really a costly or viable alternative in public areas.
To ask, Mr. Chairman, I do occasionally get complaints from people who are disabled when they use the bridges, say by Somerford and the Sainsbury's roundabout, that when they come down there's a lot of shrubbery there that impedes their progress, that wouldn't impede an able-bodied person, but if you're at a much lower level you're coming in conflict with this overgrown area. Is it your department that deals with that, or should councillors contact somebody else?
No, generally speaking, it will be ours. As we talked about earlier, whilst we try and schedule things in, things grow, things grow faster than we sometimes anticipate. So my advice would be, in general, to members, if you do get complaints of that nature, quite reasonable complaints, just let our team know. You can do that through customer services, and we can react to it. As we can't be everywhere all at the same time. We can't inspect everywhere all at the same time. So if we know about it, we do obviously have to prioritise it. We don't just sort of jump. But where we can, especially in those sort of circumstances, we'll get things sorted as quickly as we can.
Before I ask Councillor Neil to come in, I just put out a plea for the moles, and I'm not quite sure how they got into the middle of the roundabout, which is surrounded by tarmac, down to such a great level. So maybe they parachuted in. I don't know, but it was interesting, and the point that Councillor Mr. Jones has made. I cycled over the footpath today over by the into Somerford, and on the Somerford side of the flyover, there are brambles growing, and they're impinging on 50% of the width of the path, which is for disabled people and for children going to school. It's just at the right, the height that would cause them a problem. So where are we? Yeah.
You got the 35.
Where are you?
Yeah, keep going up there. A bit further. Just a bit more up there.
Yeah. 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 Exactly down there where your
Exactly where
cursor is. Yeah. So that's. But I was under the impression that that was a county matter. Yeah, this is what I'm just. But on the same while you're just checking that, on the same point, if somebody phones up and asks the question, do you then take the query and pass it on if it's not your responsibility, or do you say to the complainant, this is not our responsibility, you need to speak to county council, county highways? I would rather hope that you would say, we'll deal with it, and send them an email.
Mr. Chairman, my apologies. I should have finished up the previous point with that. I'm not the best on StatMap. From what I can gather, the area that we're talking about isn't the responsibility of CBC. We don't own it, or we don't cut it under contract. When those calls come through to my team, if they're quick and simple and they cause a real serious problem, we'll just sort them out and pass that message on to DCC. If, in the case of what I think we're potentially talking about here, it's more than just a 10-minute job to sort it out, we'll then inform DCC via their highway system of what work needs to be done on behalf of the customer that's spoken to us.
Thank you for that. Right answer. Who's next? Councillor Neil?
Thank you,
And then
Mr.
Councillor
Chairman.
Mrs. Grace. Councillor Grace.
No, I think everyone realises that I chair the railway station, and that's one of the main things we do is the floral displays and a bit of maintenance on the grass and things at the railway station. So I do sympathise. I know how difficult this year has been, particularly with the drought and the heavy rain that we had early in the spring. But I do remember the members being sent an email at the beginning of the year saying that the entrances to the town, to the Christchurch itself, Highcliffe and Jumpers, where I am, on the roundabouts, that there was going to be a new modelling of less plants, but still very pretty and more durable. And I think that was quite successful. And I would like to relay that I've heard lots of, not complaints, but lots of compliments on that. And I think you're doing a grand job. So please take it that, not everyone's complaining. A lot of people are saying thank you, but they would like to see some more wildflowers along some of the highways. The biggest problem I do get is complaints, which I tend to go straight to highways on, is generally the weeds that have been higher than some of the parked vehicles, and also the growth of tree trunks. But again, that's around highway trees, not this council's trees. So generally I do pass them comments straight on to county. And I must admit, they're pretty good most of the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Those compliments and being fed back those compliments from members is so important to me. We all like a bit of praise, but especially the team on the ground. They work very hard in all sorts of weird and wonderful conditions. So I will feed that back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Grace.
Thank you. Actually, Councillor Hilliard asked 3 of the questions that I was going to ask, but I also want to know, behind Saxon Square, that always looks a bit untidy. Is it DCC or yourself or Saxon Square, where along the river? Where you drive into the car park into Saxon Square, it always looks, and I have had lots of residents.
Is that adjacent to the to the marsh?
Where yes, where
the
you
be-
go
where
round
the
and
benches
round.
are.
Yeah.
The benches that look at the trees.
So you come off the roundabout, you turn left at the Waitrose roundabout, and then you go into
Is
Saxon Square.
That space.
Yeah, it does look very untidy, and is it yourself that deals with that part?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
His microphone on.
Sorry, that would in effect relate to the fact it's DCC owned grass, cut by us as part of the agency agreement on a twice-a-year schedule. So we in effect are keeping up our end of the bargain, if you like. I can certainly mention it to the guys if you feel it would require a little more attention.
Yes, I do. It gets always picked up at the Residents Association, and there's a lot of rubbish there quite often as well. And it doesn't look very good as you're coming in to Christchurch, really, or if you're going in to stay at the Travel Lodge or somewhere like that. I have another question. Thank you for that. It might not really concern, I don't know if this is the correct place, but I have a group of residents that want to volunteer they've come to see me to do, there's a pond, it doesn't belong to the Priory, but it's in the Priory grounds, but it belongs to CBC, and they want to clear it and get it back to a pond. I mean, Councillor Neil might know more about this, but I don't know where I would ask if this could be done by them, or would you need somebody from the council to, I mean, if I went with them, or do you?
Yeah, so we have a variety of requirements, as you can imagine, in terms of risk assessments and policies and such. If I may be so bold, if I could ask one of my team to contact you directly. So as part of our countryside team, we have an engagement officer whose role in life is to work with volunteer groups on a variety of conservation-based tasks. If I can ask Hannah to drop you an email, and then you guys can chat that through. What it means in effect is we can facilitate what they want to do in a kind of safe and constructive manner. But that would be an absolute pleasure.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor.
Matt, I did forget to mention the cemetery, and that this is the best year that I've actually had compliments for the cemetery. It has really been good, probably because you couldn't do all the cutting in the dry summer on all the grass, and you've spent a bit more time in there, but it is absolutely looking wonderful, and they've really liked that.
Interestingly, we've actually had quite a few volunteer tasks in the cemetery. So you can imagine, quite apart from sort of adding to our labour force, which is always a vaguely vexed issue. Does it actually take longer to do a job with volunteers than with a couple of very professional trained staff with big machinery? It's great because it kind of brings the local community involved. They have a kind of sense of ownership. There's also this is blatantly blowing our own trumpet now, but there's also a kind of massive input in sort of health and well-being. It's getting people out, allowing them to come together as a community, and do a little bit of exercise and help out their local space. It's quite enough of that. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think the volunteers actually felt like they could do more on that basis, but it's looking great.
Okay, I'm just going to wrap up, I think, but I just would like to make a couple of points before we do that. And looking at one of the points that you made right at the start, which is on workforce deployment, and as the weather becomes clement and inclement, that the workforce will be moved from one area to another. So if it's very wet, they'll be doing floods and drains, and if it's very dry, they'll be doing something else. But it's the same number of staff. So the cost per cut on an agency agreement has to be quantified, I guess, because Dorset County are going to pay us so much money to do so many cuts, and we've got so much workforce in order to facilitate that. And I think that's a point. So we should know what we're doing for the client, which is Dorset County Council, and I'd like to link that in to the sponsorship on the roundabouts. So sponsor this roundabout, and some company is going to pay so much money to Dorset County Council to have something done to that roundabout. Where does that money end up?
So we can quantify that. My apologies, Chairman, I don't have the figures with me this evening. I can get them to you, but we charge a per square metre rate to DCC for 7 cuts per annum, which off the top of my head is 18.5 pence. But please don't quote me on that, I will confirm it. That, if you like, is our sort of measure of what they pay us. That is our rate. The income from sponsorship of roundabouts, etc., doesn't come directly to us. So within our agency agreement, we present them, or the agency agreement contains details of X number of square metres of grass that we cut on their behalf, and that then comes down to a line item on the bill. Where the income from sponsorship comes, it doesn't come directly to us.
So may I just pursue that just a little bit further? That people sponsor the roundabout normally for flowers and chrysanthemums and stuff like that, and we then put those plants in the ground on behalf of Dorset County Council. We then buy those and we bill Dorset County Council for them.
No, we only do grass cutting on that arrangement. So the planting that we carry out, we don't. Yes, the planting in relation to sponsorship is done by them. The planting on our land is done by us as part of our core work. There's no sponsorship involved in that. The planting in relation to sponsorship is not carried out by us. That's carried out by DCC.
That's fine. And before we draw this to a close, may I just ask then, with the migration to a new authority, certainly in East Dorset where it's largely parished, will the parishes undertake their own grass cutting and verge maintenance? And if so, how is that organised and facilitated?
So as things stand in East, the arrangement is primarily around Dorset County Council areas on the agency agreement. So in the same way that we cut the highway verges, road edge stuff in Christchurch for DCC, we do the same in East Dorset. We then cut land owned by the district across the piece. Within there, the towns and parishes have a variety of arrangements, none as such with us anymore. Some have their own teams who might do cricket wickets, football pitches, etc., and also some areas that the town may own or consider worth cutting. Others, I believe, use private contractors So the village where I live, for example, there's a chap in the village who does grass cutting. He does a little bit on behalf of the parish council.
So then the parishes have an agency agreement with the district and with the county, perhaps, on the same basis that we have an agency agreement with the county. So, in other words, if the parish is cutting the grass, which is the ownership of East Dorset District Council, the council would be paying them 14p per whatever it is. Is that so? They would get some reimbursement for doing that work.
Yeah. Now that at the moment doesn't happen. It could. You're absolutely right. As members may be aware, East Dorset was out of contract. It was brought back into house. That option was looked at in a variety of areas, and it just couldn't be made to pay. The economy of scale that we are working on is so massive, nobody could come close to it in terms of a town or a parish. So as things stand, that does not happen, because there is nowhere where a town or a parish cuts grass belonging to district. And to the best of my knowledge, certainly in East, that doesn't happen in a county format either. I couldn't comment for definite because obviously I don't do county grass, but as things stand, that doesn't happen.
I think it's been a very thorough and interesting discussion. Are we content to note the report? I think it's recommended that members note the information on current ground maintenance standards. And seconded by Councillor Hilliard. All those in favour, please show. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Sorry, Paul.
Thank you, Jim. And again, is it possible I'm not sure if we cover it in the end, but it's probably worth a media story about how well we've done with cutting. Yes, the weather's, and we've been flexible with weather, but with cemetery and other things.
I think it's worth doing a press release on that. I ask our officers on my left if we can facilitate that. Good, thank you.
Thank you, members.
Okay. Good evening, man. So we're going to talk about play in Highcliffe and Walford. My apologies for not coming to the meeting that you had. I'm just on my way back from the continent as you were doing it, but I was thinking of you, and I thought that you probably had the right people sat around the table, and I would just complicate matters. So.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. Thank you for your apologies. The meeting was quite successful, I think, and certainly the ward members seemed to feel that we had done a thorough job in analysing all the possibilities. Just to give you a bit of background and to remind members where we're at with this, at the full council meeting on the 10th of July, we undertook to refurbish many of the larger play areas across the borough as a sort of play legacy project for the future. And we also decided that we would close down a number of small play areas which were poorly used and which were really not required anymore. So, but at that time, the ward of North Highcliffe and Walford was there were no possibilities for creating a new play area in that ward, and certainly the ward members and I had been searching for suitable sites for 20 years plus, to my knowledge, to try to find somewhere that was suitable to create a play area in that ward without success. But members asked us to reconsider and to have another look at all the possibilities for suitable sites in the area, and so that was the purpose of the informal meeting that we held with ward members a few weeks ago. We looked at the sites that are listed in 3.3 of the report. There were only 5 sites that the council owned which could technically accommodate a new play facility. But it was felt, for the reasons described in the report, that none of those sites were deemed appropriate by the ward members. Some of them you will see are heavily wooded, others are in very close proximity to residential areas, and certainly best practice would suggest that you don't create brand new play areas in long established residential areas lightly. It's something that you would have to go through a great deal of consultation to try to win over the local people to do that. As I said, we're looking at sort of what I would call destination play facilities, so somewhere that you might go to spend some time, you might go on the way to the shops, you might buy a coffee and sit with your children on a bench for a period of time. It's not somewhere that you would just go for 5 or 10 minutes, so that they would be significant play areas if we were to introduce them, and it was the view of both officers and the ward members that the potential for disruption to existing residents would be significant. It was noted that this ward does benefit from a wealth of open space, and what you might call natural open space, particularly Chewton Common, which is not council owned, but it does provide opportunities for natural play. It's somewhere that children already go to play informally, and the feeling was that in the absence of any sites suitable for formal play, it might be appropriate to try to promote those areas to families for natural play. And this is something that we're doing successfully on some of our countryside sites right across Christchurch and East Dorset. And just to finally let members know that the Play Legacy project itself is progressing well. We're in the process of writing specifications and procurement documents at the moment, and preparing those ready to go out to tender in the next few weeks, with a view to hopefully delivering some, if not all, of the sites before April 2019. And we are carrying out work in the schools next week to try to obtain from the children and the young people there their views on the sorts of things they would like to see. We're not asking them for specific pieces of equipment, but how they like to play, what interests them, what excites them, and what they would like to see in general terms. So that work's planned for next week. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
And thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you and your team have done in bringing the ward councillors together to make that happen. And I'm assuming that they were content with the work that you've done and the way it's going. I mean, I could understand their disappointment prior to those discussions, but I understand that they are feeling quite confident now that they're going to have something which is going to be very good facilities for young people.
Yes, Chairman, I think it's fair to say that the ward councillors are still disappointed, and as I say, that we've been looking for suitable sites for a very long time without success. But I think the feeling at the meeting was that we had looked at all the potential possible sites in their ward, and they reluctantly accepted that there is nowhere suitable. But that there are sites within reasonable close proximity, particularly the High 5 site at Warncliffe Road, which is a massive play facility for all ages, that is somewhere that is a destination and that families would use, families from North Highcliffe and Watford would use. So yes, I think they were content that we'd done the best we could.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Judith, the existing park in North Highcliffe and Watford, is it just so small and not viable? Because admittedly, I know most of the parks in the borough, and I'd never come across that one.
Chairman, yes, it's tiny and it's very, very old-fashioned. I think there's about 3 small pieces of equipment on it, and the ward councillors themselves say that it is effectively disused.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one point which actually is not directly related to what you're saying, but it's perhaps a good point to bring it up and thank Councillor Abbott for this point. As you know, Waterman's Park is, and the skateboard, we're talking about possibly resurfacing. I'm wondering, I think while I can accept that the skateboard would benefit, it's now been there for 10 years or more, I think now. There's a much more long-standing problem, which is that the toilets on Waterman's Park are, shall we say, not terribly edifying. I know that for a long time, some partnership and others have been looking at, is it possible to get a new block built? I think the cost is going to be far too much, but would it be possible for the officers to look at possibly renovating the toilets and the changing room block rather than resurfacing the skateboard park?
Chairman, obviously that's not something we've discussed, but I can certainly look into it and see whether there is a possibility of doing that work, but it would have to be at the expense of doing the resurfacing. But if members feel and the community feel that that's the priority, then I'd be happy to look at that.
May I suggest something that off the top of my head I can't remember what the funding scheme is, but it's to do with planning and it's to do with proximity to SSSI sites. What do they call that? The heathland mitigation, and this clearly, in my view, is something that would or could attract funding from the heathland mitigation, because it is doing exactly that, isn't it?
Yes, Chairman, but my understanding of that is that it has to be in relation to a specific development. So where a development is going to have an impact on the heathland, money is provided towards mitigation of that impact. We do have a pot that's essentially available for small schemes that don't have an immediate impact in themselves. And again, I can ask the question, but the overall package that we put together for the play project is £1.2 million from the council's own capital reserves.
Thank you.
To you, Chairman, that I have a vague idea that somewhere along the line I've heard about a rather large development that might just possibly be taking place, and certainly there should be, that I think could be looked at, because we've given permission in principle, it is going to go ahead. Surely that should be worth then taking to the, well, you know my views on the heathlands, but to the appropriate committee and saying this is going to happen, this would help, can it be done, please?
Yes, Chairman, certainly those discussions go on with developers of large developments, and I can talk to our planning colleagues and suggest that might be something, that the toilets might be something that they could consider funding from this. The only thing I would say is that normally the heathland mitigation is aimed at providing facilities that stop people from going to the heathland, so whether toilets would fit that category, I don't know.
Well, the logic would be that if people are encouraged to use the playing fields because the changing rooms are better, they're less likely to go and run around on the heathlands.
Are we finished with this? Thank you once again for what you have done in bringing this forward. Look at the recommendation on page 23. Accept that every effort to identify potential sites for a new play facility in the North Highcliffe and Warford ward has been pursued, and that officers investigate opportunities to promote natural play, utilising the rich resources for this which exist in the ward. Are we content?
So proposed.
Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Judith. Item 7. Councillor Jones, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little concerned by this item. You'll see that it says that this is representation at meetings on behalf of the council. Now, the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Shadow Overview and Scrutiny Committee is not a body to which this council appoints members. The members of that committee are appointed by the Shadow Authority, and I checked today that they are appointed according to party balance. Now, on this committee, Christchurch apparently should be entitled to 5 members, or there should be 5 members for the, which could be appointed, but not necessarily from Christchurch. Now, that's why I don't feel that the item should be included as representation meetings on behalf of the council, because Councillor Smith did not attend this meeting on behalf of the council. She attended it in her own right as vice chairman of that committee, appointed by the Shadow Authority in July. So while information is always welcome, it should not, for the sake of clarity, come to us as representation of meetings on behalf of the council. So, through you, Chairman, I would suggest that in future, reports that come from the committee, and I do believe it is very important that we should have reports that come back from that scrutiny committee to us, but they should not come as if they do so from a member appointed by this committee to sit on that body. Now, Chairman, I took the opportunity of watching the proceedings, and I do feel that while we shouldn't have a report representation of the council update, we should have, as we used to do in the days of the Joint Committee, an item that considers what has happened at the Joint Committee, the Shadow Executive or the whatever, and the committee, and we should be able to comment on it and send our comments to the leader, to our leader, for transmission through to the Shadow Executive. Chairman, last night's committee meeting in this chamber had a number of points that I found were very disturbing, and I know Councillor Neil was actually present, and I know Councillor Mrs Jones watched the proceedings with great glee, well, not great glee, great interest live, and I think there are a number of points that we should be concerned about. First of all, the number of task and finish groups is proliferating. Now, it is true that they're saying we're going to scrap a number. One of those, for example, that they're going to scrap is the civic functions task and finish group. And I think it would be important to this council, particularly in the light of the fact that we are looking for to generate 2 new bodies that will be the successors of this council, and will need to know, will want some input into what the civic function should be. More worrying, and I hate to be proved, it's nice to be proved right, but I hate it when it's to our detriment. I and others have said all this, well, Christchurch will be protected by our own local plan, our ongoing local plan. It was very clearly said that one of the subsequent orders that have come through or are on the process of coming through will enact our present plan, not the updated plan that is going through, our present plan for 5 years. And by 2024, the new Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Authority, or Greater Bournemouth Council, whichever you call it, will be running its own local plan. So all the work that we've done to update it, to ensure, to try and get some protections built in, the function of a scrutiny committee and an overview committee, but particularly a scrutiny committee, is to ask the questions. It's to probe. It's, as we've done tonight, to pick up on things that are worrying and are of concern, that things could be developing the wrong way. Again, what worried me was the repeated emphasis on actually all we're doing, we're looking at the risk factors. We're risk assessing, and that's not what they should be doing. They should be looking not just at what the shadow executive is doing and saying there may be a problem with it, saying, look, you're not doing this and you should be doing it. So that is another problem. Again, worrying, council tax harmonisation. Now, we heard in the debate last Tuesday, well, the shadow authority has written, as it is legally required to do, to the Secretary of State. Well, fine. We now find that there's going to be a long process of toing and froing from the shadow authority to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. What about our views? What about this council's views? We're still a lawful authority. It will be our citizens that were paying the price of things like the extra 14 million quid that Bournemouth has borrowed to pour into another black hole. Why aren't, that is something that we as a scrutiny committee should feel that we should be able to draw their attention to, and if necessary invite our leader to write to Ministry of Housing and say, look, there is another view here and this is it. And apart from one particularly...
Before you continue, or you just coming to a conclusion?
Last point and a half. The half point first. It was not very edifying to see Christchurch councillors basically asking for jobs in the new authority, but there it is. But what is worrying, again, was the point that we'll have a pre-meeting to tease out the questions that can be asked. That's not the point. The Local Government Act says you meet in public. The use of pre-meetings and party whips in scrutiny is frowned upon. But here we have the one scrutiny and overview committee saying we'll rig the questions beforehand. Okay. So, Chairman, I think we should have the ability to discuss these, to get hold of the minutes of this meeting and to take them apart. Because if we don't do that, we're letting down the people who elected us. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive and informative speech. What I'm looking at here, and the point you made is absolutely right, because it's not a representation at the meeting on behalf of the council, but the representation is valid. And I just think we need to have a perhaps I can start by asking a question. How many joint meetings are there? Is it just this one, or is there a...
For the BCP shadow scrutiny, there's a meeting every month. Yeah. So there would be an issue because this council meeting, the scrutiny meets every 2 months.
Yeah. But other joint meetings other than scrutiny?
For the BCP, there's the executive and then the full council, and I think there's an appointments committee as well.
So the point is that we need to know a summary of what is happening at all of those meetings, not just the scrutiny meeting. And therefore, I think a simple form which says feedback from BCP committees. Discuss. So that we can have something like this for each meeting that there is.
Maybe a suggestion would be that have some direction from the members what they'd actually like to receive, and then we can have a meet. We can talk about it afterwards to actually find out how that process would work.
Yeah, happy with
that. Through you, Chairman. The shadow executive, we have our leader and deputy leader are there, and I think they can be relied upon to represent our views. The appointments committee, well, yes, but it's not a wide-ranging committee. The committee that covers and gives me the most concern is the Scrutiny Overview Committee. I would like it not so much as a report back, but any member who attends, or indeed anybody who's taken the opportunity to watch the video at Christchurch, and the other councils aren't as advanced as we are, of course, and so they don't do that. I think it would be helpful if any member who were to attend were able to, whether or not they sat at the table or whether they sat in the audience and listened, I think it would be important for them for us to know what is going on, particularly at scrutiny. And while I don't think we need to have a formal meeting with an officer, if members wanted to get together and express their collection of personal views, that's entirely up to us. So, through you, Chairman, provided that the form pro forma that members could complete did make it clear that it was just a personal report to the council, I'd be happy.
Okay, I think we can take that on board. Oh, Mr. Jones. I'm surrounded by Joneses.
No relation, Chairman. Chairman, if I can just, I've listened to obviously your debate. Obviously, you are all members of the Shadow Authority, and there are procedures that allow you to attend meetings of the Shadow Authority. And similar to any meeting here, with the consent of the relevant chairman, you may also speak. The agendas are all published; they're all on the website. We use Modern Gov to publish those agendas, so you'll be familiar with that arrangement. You can subscribe to alerts to any of those agendas and minutes when they are published, and they're also available for those who use the app. Through the app, you can subscribe to a new authority to receive those details on your iPads or on your laptops that you have. So you do have rights already to attend those meetings, and all those papers are readily available to you as shadow members of that authority.
Thank you for that. I think we'll draw this to a close. We can then discuss the finer details afterwards if you're content with that. Are we all content? Thank you. And then we come to agenda item 8, which is the work programme. And I'm just going to ask Lee if she'd like to say a few words about this, because we have discussed it and I think we've got some thoughts on it.
Okay, members have probably noticed that obviously we have the next meeting in November, and there's quite a few items on that agenda as well. But then obviously we move into January and March, and at present we have no items on there. Normally for the January meeting we'd be looking at the budgetary items, but due to the local government reorganisation, that's now going to be looked at by the Shadow Council. So it has been suggested that maybe we want to look at the process of how items are being moved over to the new authority for those 2 meetings. So if members are happy to leave it with myself and the chairman, we're going to start working on populating the other 2 meetings. Also probably going to ask for in the November meeting for an item that will come to members on basically on how the process, the partnership between Christchurch and East Dorset is being split and how that's actually working at the moment.
Thank you. Very succinct. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Why can't we look at the budget?
Because as an authority, we won't exist next time. It's a shadow authority in its own right that's looking at the budget.
Yes, Chairman, but through you, it is going to affect our residents. We are still here. We are still elected councillors of the Borough of Christchurch that is going to be paying these taxes. So why can't we have a look at it and pass comment? If we look at it here, we examine it. I have a horrible feeling that the way that committee that I saw on the television is going, it'll be a yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full committee, and it will not be one that will ask the probing questions that we are able to ask here. So, Chairman, through you, I would like to put in that we should have the report for information on the budget and look at the papers that are put forward to us, and if necessary, invite somebody from the wonderful new world to come along and talk to us about it. And I do think, Chairman, our views should be aired because we are representing people. A second point, Chairman, here. I would like to suggest that we should look at the process of how things are developing with setting up the new councils, which are our responsibility. There's a lot to do if we're going to get it right and to establish 2 strong councils that will be able to stand on their own feet and to resist pressure from above. There's a lot to do, things like civic representation, things like how they are going to be set up, things like the establishment of shadow councils there so that they can set the budget, or whether we should set the budget for them, etc. So through you, Chairman, I'd like to see an item on that, certainly in January, if not before.
I'm sure we can do that. Is there anybody else that has anything that they feel should be on the forward plan? Councilman.
Yes, I think we have 2 vacancies on the Overview and Shadow Committee, which we're hoping are going to be filled by the next full council meeting of the 125 councillors. And from the meeting that I attended last night, there is a lot happening right up to Christmas from that shadow, and we need to be able to have some of those items and be able to respond to some of those items. And I think that we need to leave a little bit of space because it is getting very busy.
So what are you suggesting?
That will be determined by their agenda, unfortunately. I mean, we do have access to getting the agendas in time, but not necessarily for our two monthly meetings. I feel that there may well be a need to put the odd additional metering in just to be able to do that and the new town councils and etc. So I think we're going to be a lot busier than it looks on paper.
I have no doubt about that. David?
Through you, Chairman, I will support that. I do understand, I really do, the pressure on the officers because they're now at the position of working for 2 masters, and we all know what happens if the people who try and work for 2 masters. But on the other hand, we are still the authority. I remember somebody saying to me once, this is a grammar school, it will stay a grammar school until the 17th of July 1975, and I expect grammar school standards from you, and I expect grammar school standards from the pupils. So I really do feel we've got a job to do. I do appreciate it. Anything that I can do to help with papers, anything I can, and I'm sure there are others around here who are better qualified in some respects than I am, I think we would all contribute to try and ease the burden, but we've got to do what we've got to do.
Okay. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, as Councillor Jones said, it's all about a time of change, and I think it probably was about this time last year that we have the employee staff survey. Now, whether it's relevant, I don't know if the chief executive goes out to staff regularly. I know he's got his blog and everything like that, the open feedbacks and lunches and things like that. But is there a survey?
No, I believe there's not because of the local government reorganisation. Richard might be able to have a few more. No.
Okay. And that is that.
Sorry, Chairman, one final item of business.
Okay, go on. So have I missed something?
Yes, well, it affects you because you're the one going in tomorrow for them to talk about with you.
Oh, right, okay.
Can we wish our chairman a successful stay in the Royal Bournemouth, at least as successful as mine was?
Thank you.
Can we add the vice chairman to that as well, so that he has his mask removed and he doesn't break into any opera tonight?